Hi everyone, and it's great to be here on the 10th European Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff Charity Consortium Conference. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's agreed to join us today, both as a speaker and a participant. We've got a really exciting agenda set up. But before we get started, just a few kind of housekeeping things to share with you. We're obviously using the Hop-In platform for today. So this is a great platform that allows us to really share our content really nicely with all our families and attendees, both now and when they watch the recordings later. And on top of that, it allows a real good interaction. So you can start using our chat function to drop any questions you may have, or just to say hello to everyone who's going to be speaking. The plan is after each session, if there's any questions, we'll divert those to the speaker. And if there's, we run out of time, what we're going to be looking at doing is then transitioning those via email to those people who have asked the questions. So in terms of the event today, we've got a really exciting agenda. So I just want to share that with you. First things first, obviously a big thank you to our sponsors, so Azafaros and Sanofi, for making this event possible. Really grateful to support them, and the other companies have shown not just the CATS Foundation, but ETSCC and our other member charities over the years. So the agenda today is really focusing on our support as patient groups to our families in the first 12 months after diagnosis. We are aware that this is a really important topic that many families go through, and it can all make the experience very positive or very negative as they come to terms of managing Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff within their family. So what we are looking at doing today is to talk through that from the perspective of clinicians, from industry, from our own families, then looking at some of the resources that have been developed and having a panel discussion on that topic. Then we're going to be looking at the caregiver experience, looking at how that's managed within Europe. Then we've got Allan from the Pompe Support Network, who's going to talk to us about his own experiences within the Pompe community. And then that'll go on to another panel. That's today, and then tomorrow we've got the really exciting science and research, which we're going to talk through with our companies who are looking into developing new treatments for GM2, and then also some really exciting initiatives that have been developed, such as the Simpsons video by Hand in Hand in Germany. And on top of that, we've got a few speakers talking about various rating scales which are currently in development, and we're going to finish the day talking through the GM1 and GM2 Global Alliance, which is a new initiative we're working on. So that's the plan for the conference. It's a packed agenda. We're really excited. But as you'll notice and see on the first session today, very briefly is myself going to be talking through about the ETSCC for our new members or for those people who've never experienced or come into contact with us before. So in terms of the ETSCC, this, as I mentioned before, is the 10th time that we've come together, which I think is a fantastic achievement for us as a group, because it really shows how important the work we've been doing has been making a difference to many of the people that we support. The ETSCC was actually set up back in 2012, and at the time, there were no patient groups providing any dedicated support within Europe. So we were umbrella organisations, but actually we realised we needed to not only set up individual country-specific patient groups who could support those communities, but we also realised working together as a European group can make a much bigger difference as we drive forward treatments, as we drive forward support and sharing information. So one of the things we did very successfully at CATS, is where I represent with my wife, is we supported the establishment of groups in Spain, in Germany, in Portugal, and partnered with other large organisations like VML in France to really make sure that our families get the right level of support that they need. And it started because we wanted to work with research. I'll take you back to when 10 years ago now, there wasn't so much actually happening in this space. We also wanted to raise awareness to support families, to make sure that actually they had a network they could come to for information or just to meet other people, because we all know how important that is. And also, very importantly, we wanted to make sure those communities and those countries that didn't have a great support network had somewhere where they could come to for information. And whenever I give a talk, I'm regularly asked, what's one of the main drivers, not just at CATS, but the ETSCC, what we're trying to achieve. And actually what we want to do is give them hope. And we look at this word hope. We don't just see hope as access to treatments. We actually see hope as in having access to good care, improving quality of life, because that can make a huge impact on a family and not just the person impacted by Tay-Sachs or Sandhoff disease. And what we do is show that there is hope that they can be part of a community and part of a network, so they can get everything that they need to improve quality of life, and as we work towards those future treatments that may be coming relatively soon. Because as many will know, and this is a story that many of us had 10 years ago, which I hope doesn't happen as much, but many of us were told we wouldn't meet another family impacted by Tay-Sachs or Sandhoff, and that makes it very, very lonely. And that's one of the key things we try to address at not just the individual patient groups, but also the ETSCC itself, because we could really see that a community could be built. And this is a real example. When I held our first event in Monzi, there are 3 or 4 families there, and now we have groups when we do them in person, which we haven't done since COVID-19, but pre-COVID, we had these big events throughout Europe. And to me, what's really exciting, we see that each country has their own community, has their own events, has their own conferences. And that's really growing and growing and growing. What that's making sure is that we know our families can get access to that high level of support that we mentioned previously that's so important. Because our goal really is to support those people impacted by the diseases. We want to give them an opportunity to have a future, and that's really what we're trying to achieve, because a lot actually has changed. A lot has changed in terms of how our families get their information. A lot has changed in how they actually can consume that information as well. And what we really want to do is ensure that they can see the distance we've traveled in 10 years and where we want to get to in the future, because really for a lot of us, we can see an impact that we can have to lots of people out there, because it's important. We're bridging that gap, we're providing that support, and what we want people to really understand that they're not alone. And I think that is a key message we're always trying to get out as the individual patient groups in our countries, is that although you're going through this, there is somewhere where you can turn to for information and support. And that's something that the ETSCC has done very effectively, both as a group and as individual patient groups, which is what we'll touch on. Because for us, we're here for each other. We really don't believe any family should be alone. This isn't a journey that people should feel isolated in. The families that we support, and I know I speak for all members of the patient groups from the ETSCC, is that they inspire us every single day. Their dedication to their family member really drives us on to make sure we continue to provide that high level of support. So when we were discussing, what would be a nice thing to share today, we thought it'd be quite good to reflect on the last 12 to 18 months of really the highlights and the achievements of each of the patient groups, the projects they've been working on as we support our community. So one of these things is then looking individually, like for example at VML, with Ben Wise, been doing an amazing level of support, one-on-one with families, to make sure they get that right level of support. They're raising awareness. They're members of the ETSCC and the Global Alliance, as we mentioned previously. Those in Portugal, they've been holding their events where they bring their community together each year, which is a great way for people to get the peer-to-peer support that's so vital. They also continue raising awareness. And as mentioned before, they're also doing a very important family support to make sure people have access to the right level of information that they need. In Spain, with BIA and ACTIs, they've been doing great work with their support, awareness raising again, which is vital to make sure that families know they have somewhere they can turn to for information. And they've been very active with the ETSCC and this global initiative we're trying to set up, which I think is going to make a really big difference to our community. And they've been instrumental on the establishment of that group. Hand in hand in Germany, they've once again held a fantastic conference. I think there's over 120 people who attended that, which is a great way for them to foster that community feel, but also talk about the research that's going on. There's a great resource they developed about symptoms, which we'll be showing tomorrow with Dr. Mengel to go through that and why that resource was created. It was initially in German. It's now available with subtitles in English, which is a fantastic addition to resources we have for families. And again, they're very active in the ETSCC and the global initiative. And then the CATS Foundation, we've had a very busy year working on developing our clinical toolkit, which is a great project that's going to be shared later today, and how we're supporting families. We launched our Rare Revelations podcast, which is really, really exciting. We're getting great speakers to join us to talk about how they have actually managed aspects of the disease, also how they've lived in managing not just the disease, but then the lifestyles afterwards. And we also held our family weekend, which is a great way where our families can all come together. Again, like with other organisations, to share experiences. And I think that's very, very important. The question again is why is it important? Why does any of this matter? Well, I think as a families, we know that it's vital that you get support, information. There's somewhere where you can turn to, you trust, and people like all of us have been through. Now we're dedicated to what we're doing, and it's the fact that our families support us, enable us to do our work. None of it would be possible without them, and they inspire everything we do every single day. I think that's a testament to our community that we are able to achieve so much individually as small patient groups to make such a big impact on our patient community in the rare disease space in general. Now, when we look at success, how do we measure the success of the ETSCC? Really what we're looking at for us is measured in support. That's what we're really trying to do here. We want to make sure that our families all feel they have the right level of support, make sure that there's everything they need and everything they deserve, to be honest. And that's one of the key things we're doing. Without this dedicated community, none of that would be possible. So again, we want to say thank you to all the families out there who help us go about and do our work, because I think it's very important and that's recognised. So to finish there, I'm now going to ask Maria to join us. So, hello Maria, how are you?
Hey, hello Dan. I'm fine. I'm very honored to join this meeting. Thank you for the invitation.
No, it's great to be here. So, consulting with paediatric inherited metabolic diseases, and it's going to give the clinical perspective of the first 12 months of going through a diagnosis. So do you want me to share the slides or would you rather share them?
Oh, yes. Can you share the slides? That would be great. Thank you.
That's cool. You just tell me
Wonderful.
next slide and I'll move them on. So
Oh, thank you for being my personal assistant today. Great. So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to join this meeting, Dan. As Dan said, my name is Maria de Castro. I'm Spanish and I'm a pediatric metabolic consultant. I previously worked in Spain for 10 years and I moved to UK 6 months ago. So I'm a new face in the community. I'm going to talk about the first year after diagnosis from a clinical perspective. Dan suggested this title, and I think that is very appropriate and very convenient, and it made me think a lot about it, because sometimes we take things for granted and we assume that we have a routine, but thinking about it with new eyes, I think is very important for us. So thank you again, Dan, for suggesting this talk. I live and work in Manchester in the UK, which is a specialist center for treating children with lysosomal storage disorders. Oh, sorry, can you next slide, please? I'm not used to have a personal assistant, being honest. So this is the hospital in Manchester where I work, and it's a specialist center for treating children with lysosomal storage disorders. And I used to work in the northwest of Spain, and where the weather is also very rainy, so no worries, I'm doing okay here from that perspective. Next, please. Most of you here, of course, will be familiar with GM1 and GM2 gangliosidosis, but this slide is just to explain the complexity of these diseases. And it shows that these diseases affect many body systems, so that means that they affect children in different ways. So one enzyme defect will build up one type of chemical within the body, leading to a lot of different problems for the young person. Next, please. And the same is obviously true for GM2 as GM1. Next. Thanks. So these disorders exist on a continuum. By that, we mean that not every child with GM1 and GM2 is the same. So you can see that there are some young patients who present very early in life and have a very rapid progression of the disease. And then there are other patients that present in later childhood or even adulthood. And then later, typically you present, the more slow the progression of the disease is. And we need to take this into account when informing the families and when we are having our first appointment with them. So this is true in GM1, as we see in this slide, that the infants who present early, sorry, next slide, please. So in this slide, I wanted to show you something that is very interesting too. For GM1, the infants who present early, they move rapidly on the disease, and they follow a very similar pattern in many ways to each other. But when we look at the late onset cases, there is much greater variability. So yes, all of them will have a slower progression, but each patient is clearly following his own disease journey. And this makes very difficult for families to compare one child with another or one young adult with another, but also for clinicians when giving advice about what to expect for the future. Next, please. The same variability is true in GM2 gangliosidosis, and I think that this graph shows the reason why this happens. Infants with very severe genetic mutations, meaning that there is no enzyme at all left in the body, will present early and progress rapidly, unfortunately. Whereas less severe genetic mutations leading to a little bit of enzyme left can lead to a more slowly progressive disease. Hence, this explains the variability that we see in our patients. And this is, of course, seen in GM1 and GM2. Next slide, please. And this is true, of course, for GM1 and GM2. Next slide. Thanks, Dan. So the variability from patient to patient and the multisystemic nature involving different organs means that no one hospital specialist can provide all of the care a patient needs. We need many people involved in their care. You may be familiar with the term of multidisciplinary team, meaning a team made up of different healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, and another professionals with different skills and different knowledge. But now we're beginning to use the term interdisciplinary, which I like most and is probably more appropriate and necessary for what is needed by complex GM1 and GM2 patients. So what is an interdisciplinary team? It's not only made by people with different skills and knowledge, but this team is able to communicate effectively with each other, combining their expertise to work together. So this is a little bit like an orchestra where there may be different musicians, but they have to be working together to create a good piece of music. The same we need is the same for us. We need all of our specialists to work together for the benefit of the patient. And this requires coordination and direction. In the case of an orchestra, this would be done by a conductor. In this case, you can see Leonard Bernstein performing. But in the case of a patient with GM1 or GM2, we need a specialist in the disease, usually a lysosomal expert, but it depends on the hospital because other physicians can play this role. I think that the coordinator should be someone who knows the disease, who has expertise in the disease, but someone who also has very good skills coordinating and communicating with families and with other healthcare providers. Next slide, please. Well, some individuals and families will live very close to a specialist center, but most of them will not. These are rare diseases, and you may need to travel quite far away within your country to meet a specialist who will understand your condition. This means that extra teams are added to our list, and or extra musicians are added to our orchestra. And this is another challenge. The local hospital team and the community care teams are essential because they provide care to the patient on a day-to-day basis. Um, and these teams typically don't know very much about GM1 and GM2 gangliosidosis because they are rare diseases. And maybe your child or your own young adult with this condition is the first patient they see with this disease. And that is scary for the families, but it's also scary for the healthcare providers. So Um, but at the same time, they have a big expertise in their own area, and they really know the community, and they really know who to liaise with to solve problems on a day-to-day basis. So they are really useful, and they're really important for the care of your child or young person, as long as they can be directed and communicated effectively and appropriately by someone who knows more about the disease, the specialist, the lysosomal specialist. So all of these central services and specialized services need to communicate with each other. And we also need to be reassuring to local services that they can continue to do what they know well. They just need to perhaps adapt for the specific needs of the child. And maybe they need some education about the course of the disease and what to expect in the next few months or years. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, finally, we are talking about the first year after diagnosis, but I wanted to share with you this background because I think that is very important to understand how to really organize the care of a patient with GM1 and GM2. At the first appointment in Manchester, we will usually meet the family, and we will, the team who will meet the family will include a lysosomal expert, like myself in this case, and of course the patient and the family will be the center of the care. We will typically see the patient with a specialist nurse. What does this mean? That the nurse is an expert on the disease. So the nurse will know the course of the disease as much as possible because of this variability and heterogeneity in our population. But she will know the course of the disease, and essentially she will be able to communicate with the family, but also with wider services. So I think that maybe she's going to be the conductor of this orchestra. Is quite interesting. Um, we often ask one of our highly specialized physiotherapists to join us for the first time because they are experts in assessing the child's and young person muscle tone, which can, of course, vary from type to type, but also over time for the same condition and the same patient. And the specialized physiotherapists can also assess the individual needs of a patient, including everyday things like do you need a special car seat? Do you need a special badge? Do you need any adaptation at home or a wheelchair? And depending on the stage of the disease, we will often involve an speech and language therapist, but it usually happens very early on because the SALT team, which will assess speech as well as swallowing. As you all know, that the speech and swallowing is essential in this disease, and most of our patients will manifest symptoms related to this. And that's why the SOL team is very critical in helping make decisions and managing to keep our children with GM1 and GM2 safe. And well, this is the core, from my perspective, of professionals you may see at the first appointment. But of course, it's not the only professionals you need. And over the first year after diagnosis, you are likely to meet many of these different hospital specialists. Some of them will have more experience than others in this disease, in GM1 or GM2, but they all of them will have important skills to help us and to help the patient. So it's important, therefore, that not only us, but also the family learn how to communicate with each of these different specialties. Also, make sure that everyone is aware of what is happening and everybody knows who is involved. And next slide, please. I also wanted to mention grief because as a clinicians, we can share with you, with our patients, and with our families many clinic information or medical information, but this information is very hard to digest. And this affects so much the families, but also young adults when they have this disease. Um, and when we talk about grief um, on a day-to-day basis, we think about death, but grief is not only the final part of our life. Grief is when our expectations are not being met in terms of what we expected for our child to be or to be able to do. Or so it's about needing to readjust our expectations to the reality, and that is very hard. And we need to understand this as a healthcare providers, because most of our families will have grief responses, and they are normal, and they can last for many years, and grief is not linear. So sometimes when you think that one of your families has overcome certain some stages of the grief process, maybe you give them a bad result of a test, and they will have grief responses again, because it's about losing something again. And sometimes families, after the first appointment, they will ask us many questions, uh, many questions and repeated questions about the same things. And we may think, oh, we explained this perfectly the first time. Yeah, but the family needed to digest this. So it's really convenient to understand this, and to make easier to the families to contact us, because they will need their time to understand this information and process this information. So that's why I wanted also to mention that the 1 year after diagnosis will also include suffering and loss and grief responses, and this is normal, and we need to be aware of this. Next slide, Dan, please. And thank you so much for your attention today.
That's great. Thanks, Maria. Very interesting talk. I mentioned to you previously, I thought the slides were fantastic. And that topic of grief is something that I know my wife, Patricia, and I had talked about, especially on the first year. You kind of go through the grieving process of loss of skills in the case of Emily, when she can no longer sit, when she can no longer reach out for toys. And it's a difficult adjustment, I think, as a parent to come to terms with, because it isn't sudden. These things happen over a period of time. And I do think that grief, looking at grief, as you mentioned, not just at the end point, but actually those different loss of skills would be very interesting for us to consider and how we support people. So thank you very much for joining us. You will be back shortly for a panel. So I'll let you drop off, and now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So thank you.
Thank
Gisela, nice to see you again. Thank you for joining us this year and for agreeing to speak. So Gisela is from Azafaros. I'm sure she'll give an introduction to herself shortly. I'm just going to put your slides up, and you just say next slide to move them along, and I'll leave you to it.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan, for the invitation, also to accommodate my slides when I say next slide, but also very welcome, or thank you to all, and very nice meeting you again since last year. So Dan asked me to tell you something about the first year after diagnosis and then the industry perspective. So what are we as a company obliged to deliver to you to make your journey a little bit easier in finding solutions or studies. Next slide, please. So when, like Maria said, when the diagnosis is given to you or to patients and families, it's very difficult. It's devastating, but it's also difficult to get the correct information, or at least you want to inform yourself with all the information there is. Next slide. So this information is mostly delivered by different sources. So by healthcare professionals, by the care team. Sometimes families go for a second opinion. Most of you probably started a huge internet search, which is from the last 15 years possible, but before it wasn't even possible. People were literally sent it home with one little paper. There are dedicated patient organizations, and there are companies who are working on the product and have a patient focus websites or pages. We as a company, we realize that it's it's important to deliver proper information when we are working or when we can share the information. And we know that that patients and families are looking for information. So we do everything with multiple sources to deliver and to post the correct information. So our website, or the websites of companies, are mostly up to date. They will share their studies, they will share their activities, they will share who they are, and they also will share with whom they are connected, like other national, international patient organizations, but also centers. Next slide. So if I go only to looking for studies, which is where companies are mostly working on, is that we understand that families are looking for what is after looking for information on the disease, they also look for information on activities and studies, phase 2 studies, phase 3 studies, and in a later stage after the treatment, if there's a possible treatment on the market, also phase 4 studies. Next slide. So before I start, before I give a bit more information on what the company does to share the proper information for families, it's maybe good to know that what entails a setup of a study protocol. So when there is a compound, researchers and companies think it could be something has a clinical benefit, then companies are defining the medical need and the population and the endpoints of assessments before they start with setting up a protocol. They develop all documents like informed consent, investigator brochures, and a protocol-related guidance. So this is where physicians then in a later stage can work with. They need to define countries and sites. They have to work with at least 4 times with health authorities and ethic commissions. And then when the protocol is developed, and I can also say that we include physicians and patients in the development of the protocol to see that we really deliver a patient-driven protocol or study at least. After talking with healthcare authorities, and when we then get an approval, we are obliged to publicate these studies on a platform called clinicaltrial.gov. I will explain a little bit later. Before the first patient in the study, and after an ethical commission approval in a study center. So there are multiple study centers who work on the study or who can include patients in the study, but they first have to, their ethical committee have to give approval before the study can start. When everything, the process is lengthy, as you probably all know, it's very lengthy. It can take up to 1 or 2 years before a protocol is defined or designed. And also with all the submissions to ethical committees and regulators, it can take a long time. Next slide. So the need of obligation for companies is to inform on studies and several and on the programs. So when we have a program or a clinical study, we put it on our company website. We have, in our case, we have a clinical part and a patient part, so that it's clear what is written. We have information on patient organizations, etc., but also on our clinical studies. We work with patient organizations, we inform patient organizations, we send newsletters, we give them materials to put on their websites, we speak at patient conferences to inform on the study, and we give webinars, and the same we do with scientists and healthcare professionals. We share our information directly, we inform them on scientific congresses, and so that everybody in the community is informed on the study. And when the study is then, like I said in the former slide, ready for publication, Then we will put it on clinicaltrial.gov, which is a platform where all studies are shared, and patients and clinicians and investigators can find that certain study. Next slide. So what is clinicaltrial.gov? Like I said, it's a website and an online database of clinical research studies and their results. So all studies from 200 countries are publicated on this platform. And probably most of you know them, but know this website, but for the persons who don't know them, this website is a database where studies are shared, study records are shared, where you can find which study runs in which country, what the inclusion criteria are, what the exclusion criteria are. So patients and healthcare professionals go there to learn about clinical research. Researchers look at clinicaltrial.gov to see if there is a need for another research or which research is already done. And sponsors and investigators submit all their studies there so that they can show to the world that their study is running, but also what the outcome of their study is when the study is finished. Next slide. So like I said, we work with a lot of patient organizations worldwide, and through those patient organizations, we develop we ask for support for the development of our studies so that they can put patient input in the design of the study, what is important for patients, what is, and for families, how would a study setup could be beneficial for patients and their families. Next slide. So one of the things most companies also try to do is make the information on their studies as educational and informational as possible. So like this is an example what we did with our national history study together with the patient organizations, with CATS in particular. We developed videos, and those informational videos on what the study entails or withholds. We can put it on our website, but we also asked to share it. We asked also physicians to share it, but also we asked patient organizations to share it on their website, so that if you as a family or as a patient are looking for information on a clinical study, that you have some extra educational materials. By the way, when you accept to be part of a study, you also receive in the hospital a full package with informed consent and all the information on the study, so that you are well informed before you sign to be part of this study. Next slide. So next to that, that the website is a portal for the website of companies is a portal also for information, and clinical.gov, but also is a portal for information on their study. We get also a lot of direct requests from patients or family members. Those our numbers are our inbox or MedInfo website is mentioned on our website, of course, but also on clinical.gov. And we get via the inbox often a personal request for mainly for information on studies, on where studies are, and if patients are eligible to be part of this study. Like I said, request via the website, and it's always internally, if it's not directly presented to patient advocacy or medical, it's always deferred via the inbox to us, and we will always answer. If it's possible, we will always answer, and we will always answer via an email. Next slide. What are we doing with a direct request within the company? If needed, so the patient engagement, head of patient engagement or the medical department will consult the study team in regards of an accessible study and PIs. So for example, if somebody from Brazil has a request, we will see if there is a study in Brazil. We most of the time we know the age of the patient. One specific patient, only specific patient details will be shared with the team so that we can see if we can refer a patient towards a study, not really to a study, but more explain in an email that there is a study going on in their country. Reaching out to a study team is only to gather information to patient and family members and seeking appropriate information on study accessibility in a region or in a country. Next slide. This is a bit of a busy slide, but so we will always answer an email. We only will inform on publicly available information on current company activities that we can share. If possible, we will do a referral to a national study investigator. We can provide support for organizing the first contact, but we can never influence or ask for participation. We can only inform, educate, but never influence. In the email we answer to the requester, we always inform on local and relevant patient organizations so that the family member or patient can find the proper information, but also the proper support when they are looking for more information. I think for family members it can be very helpful, and patients can be very helpful to be informed and part of a patient organization. For current and future updates, we always refer to the clinicaltrial.gov company websites or back to the physicians. And we will never, as mentioned before, we will never advise, advertise, or interfere in medical decisions. And being part of a study is a medical decision, and we never will influence. So we will never say to PI, this patient has to be in this study. Next slide. As you probably all know, that industry connecting with patients is heavily regulated, which is can be very beneficial. So we are bound to rules and obligations and compliance, and we're bound to rules due to the FPA code. But so we have the obligation to inform the patient, because I think we need to avoid that the patient feels lost in their search for a potential study or treatment. Obligation to balanced and publicly available information. Companies always refer to PIs, treaters, or treatment centers. We can never advertise for a product or a treatment, obviously. The healthcare professional decides the best treatment options and study options. Companies can never advise and advertise, like I said before. We can never keep personal data, and we can never be aware who is in our studies. So we can be the vehicle, let's say, towards the proper information in a country, but we can never influence. In general, when a patient requests something to a company, the request will always be handled by a patient engagement team or a medical team. So never by a commercial team. Next slide. So this is something we put always in our email. We strongly believe that the decision to include patients in a clinical trial must remain in the hands of experts, physicians who practice medicine in agreement with patients and their caregiver. But as a company, we have the obligation to inform the patient, and we would like to inform the patient, but always very balanced, and give the patient at least the opportunity to decide what is best for the patient or the family members. So for the whole family. I think this was the last slide. Please let me know if you need more information, and happy to talk later.
That's great, Gisela. Thank you so much for giving the overview, because I think it's important, again, for many of our families to know that if maybe they reach out to companies in that first 12 months, there's a process that everyone goes through. So seeing it from kind of your experience, your perspective, also seeing it from Maria's, is shedding more light, I think, on the journey many families have gone on. And I know you're going to be joining our panel later today. So if anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat. So I'll let you drop off, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello, Emma and Nikki. So Emma and Nikki have joined us today to talk about the first 12 months from the family perspective. Obviously, these are two amazing ladies that support the work we do at the CATS Foundation as our family support officers, and I've spoken to many families over many years have gone through what many of us have gone through. So I will leave it to them to talk through this session. And again, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for that. So to get my mind back to the time of Stanley's diagnosis, I had to go back through my Google photos. I sort of put in those dates between 2016 and 2017 to jog my memory. Those first 12 months were all such a huge blur. So much happened and so much changed in our lives, let alone it being tipped on its head. That I just had to, do that just to get an idea and sort of take me back to what was actually going on at that time in our lives. After our initial appointment, the actual appointment where we were given Stanley's diagnosis when he was 14 months old, back in 2016, we were told his condition, Tay-Sachs, was terminal, and there was a period of time that I just don't recollect. I just know I was very frightened and just completely devastated. I think it was hard. Stanley wasn't actually that unwell when he was diagnosed. He was still breastfeeding. He was fairly chatty with his noises. He was extremely smiley. So it was very hard to, believe this diagnosis. Just to actually believe what was happening and what was going to happen. He did have an NG tube at this point. He couldn't manage solid foods. I don't think we ever really got on solid foods at all. He would breastfeed, and that was coming a little bit tricky for him. I think we just had a chest infection due to that, so we couldn't keep that up for much longer, as he just started to have sort of that trouble with his swallow. I think that was the first real first real thing that he actually struggled with properly. So he'd been in hospital for I think just at one overnight with a chest infection. Up to that point, we had his gastrostomy fitted soon after diagnosis, and then after that we sort of, things were okay, and then about 2 months later, I think it was, we got to the point where Stanley, I don't know, we weren't really sure what was going on at first, and then we were thinking these are possibly seizures. Then he started to have what was, definitely seizures, but unfortunately these seizures were that they would stop him from breathing, so they were quite frightening. We ended up staying in hospital with these particular kind of seizures for about 7 weeks, and I think that was our longest ever hospital stay with Stanley. The stop breathing thing caused a lot of panic for everyone involved, and this was an incredibly stressful time. And trying to find the right cocktail of medication to get these seizures under control was quite a lengthy process. We eventually got to a point where we were discharged, and so much had changed. It was quite terrifying to go home. Our lives just looked completely different. At this point, we were about 5 months into, 5 months along since the diagnosis had happened. And over the next few months, again, our lives were, going to change so much. I think we went from just living at home with Stanley as normal before this hospital admission. I think we had tube feeding on the go. He had his gastrostomy. We had oxygen at home. We had suction machine as he needed regular suctioning. We were doing the tube feeding. There were appointments, there were brain scans, EEGs, community care team were involved. We had overnight carers because I got to the point where I wasn't sleeping and I became unwell. We were involved with the children's hospice. All of this happened within these first 12 months. And then on top of all this is the medication, of course. We have medication for seizures, for pain, for reflux, for constipation, to help sleep. There was the antibiotics for the constant chest infections that we kept experiencing. Chest physio, nebulizers, just so much. And looking back now, the absolute, and this is what I think when we have new families come along, I think it's so much that you have to adapt to, but you do. I think it's amazing. But I think that one of the most amazing things I think that happened with in terms of support, and that the thing I found that helped the most with support was the CATS Foundation. I was in touch with Dan, I think literally the night that Stanley got diagnosed. I messaged Dan and Patricia, and then Nikki messaged me straight away. And that was the most just the most valuable support that I had, to be honest. That was absolutely, that meant everything. To come across some other people who'd heard of the disease to start with was a bit of a relief, to say the least. And these people who actually had children who had Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff, and I'll never forget that. That was I think, meeting these people just saved me, really. Thank you, Nikki.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Emma. It's hard hearing, go through reliving that, Emma. I know it's tough. And I think that's what makes us not in a unique position, but a good position for our roles, that we lived through the situation ourselves and can really empathise with the families that we try and help and support, because wasn't that long ago that we were in their shoes. So first 12 months after diagnosis, Ruby's diagnosis, I remember initially lots of emotions, overwhelmed, shock, anger, fear of the unknown, and isolation, really, because nobody had heard of this disease, and I could barely get my own head around it, and trying to explain it to other people, even health professionals, was difficult. So after those initial feelings subsided a little, I realised, the basic things again, that she was still my little girl, still needed me, still needed a mom. So I kind of shelved my anger as such and tried to make it positive and turn it into what could I do for Ruby? What could I do to make things better? And that's what I focused on. So I swiftly became her carer and her expert, as we all do, as all the parents of Sandhoff and Tay-Sachs children do. We became their experts and their advocates. So it was, as you said, Emma, lots of appointments and different people that you never knew existed before, and all those departments and different names and long words that I didn't understand. It was overwhelming. It was a lot to take in and try and deal with. But I just tried to focus on making sure she had access to everything she needed, whatever services they were, or I found out about, or read up on. I did a lot of reading, a lot of research, and that's what I tried to throw myself into. Learned to balance the medical overload, and it was at times an overload. So I tried to balance that with normal stuff too. Go into the park or the beach, as you see in some of those photos, or just hanging out with her twin brother. So I try to remember those things too, which were as important. Learning to manage new symptoms that would come along, seizures being one of the most scary. But it's amazing what you become not comfortable with, but used to, managing apnea seizures or difficult medications or all these schedules and appointments and things. It's amazing what you can actually manage. And then for a while I was concentrating on ourselves, but after a little while I did reach out to other families. I was in the States when Ruby was diagnosed, so I did reach out to a family in Australia, and I got quite friendly with them first. And then there was a family in America that we went to, shared the same doctor, and that led to contacts in Europe. And a little while later, I did connect with CATS, with Patricia and Dan, and the charity was in its first few formative year, I think, at the time. But it was great to have someone in the UK that understood what I was going through, and I could reach out, and I didn't feel quite so alone anymore. And that was a huge relief to have Dan and Patricia on the end of the email there. And so I think I remember, Emma, coming to the hospital to meet you and Stanley for the first time, and I think you were one of the first families that I helped from the beginning of diagnosis, and it was really important to me to do as much as I could, and you know, now you're a good friend and a wonderful colleague, but I try always to remember those first 12 months and all those emotions I had when we speak to other families, particularly when they're first diagnosed. It's not hard to go back and remember how it felt. And that's what I try and do, to keep pushing forward and doing what we can.
Yeah, it's always very much on the surface, isn't it? I think, really. So I had to look back at those first 12 months, but really it's all there. The feelings are all there, the emotions. And just one more thing. I think the most valuable thing the CATS Foundation that you guys did for me was to introduce me to other families. I had a connection with Catherine, whose little boy Liam was about the same age as Stanley and also had Tay-Sachs. We had so much in common, as did our boys, and this friendship helped us both. It was such a supportive friendship, and I think having someone who truly understands your day-to-day worries, stresses, it's just priceless. There's just something immensely comforting about talking to and being around people who truly understand.
I couldn't agree more. That's really interesting to hear that the first 12-month experience is also very different to other people. And, you know, I really think that the work that CATS are doing, and I know the other groups, ACTIs, Hand in Hand, us and VML do, is to make sure that first 12 months that now isn't as traumatic as it may have been, for example, when our kids were born, where the network wasn't so well established, information wasn't really out there. I mean, personally, I reflect back to when Emily was diagnosed, it was such a hectic period. And with one bit of advice I always give people, and you guys know this, is just to make the most of it, enjoy your time together and make those memories, take those amazing photos and videos, have smiles and laughs, because it's really important to have those really nice things to reflect back on, which I'm sure that many of the people who are on the event today will agree. So I know you guys are going to be joining the panel shortly, so I will leave you and I will introduce our next speakers. So thank you very much, Emma and Nikki, for that.
Thank you.
Cool. So I'm very pleased to welcome both Lewi and Iona from Cognitant, who are going to talk through a project called the Clinical Toolkit for GM2, which is something we're really, well, their team was a really great project that we put together, basically, about a support tool for our families. So, Lewi, do you have the slides ready?
Yes, I can just pull those up now.
There we are. I put them on the stage. You should be able to flick through. When you want me to play the video, just say play video and I'll make that happen. Okay, guys.
Amazing. Thanks, Dan. So hello. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting us to speak at the conference today. We're so excited to be here talking about a new online toolkit for Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease that we've developed in collaboration with various stakeholders, as you'll see through the talk today. So this project, just as a disclosure, was funded by educational grants from Sanofi and Azafaros and is provided by the CATS Foundation. My name's Lewi, and I'm joined by my colleague Iona today. So we're from Cognitant Group, which is a digital health company that specialises in the production and dissemination of health information. Our mission really is to develop health information that's accessible to everyone. And we do this by developing information with people affected by the conditions that we're working with and their families. We also create content in multiple formats, such as 2D and 3D animation and virtual reality, to make information really memorable and impactful. Overall, our aim is to empower people to better understand their health and any conditions, and subsequently better self-manage. So I touched very briefly on the co-creation process and how we collaborate with people. And we strongly believe in creating information with people, and we call that process co-creation. You can see on screen that there are 4 phases to the co-creation process. We start with a discovery phase that's really primary research, such as focus groups, interviews, with either patients, caregivers, healthcare professionals, or patient advocacy groups. And we really use that to understand unmet needs and where people are coming from kind of in their journey. And then we move through to a define phase, which is where we run a co-creation workshop, often with the same stakeholders as the discover phase. And we really use that as an opportunity to say, this is what we heard during the discover phase. We've interpreted that and developed either analogies or a curriculum. What do you think about that? Have we kind of heard that correctly? We also have a in-house creative team made up of animators and developers who then develop the product based on all of those insights. And then we deliver the final solution, which is what we're going to talk about today.
So yeah, the overall aim of this project was to create an online toolkit that could help provide better information and better support for people with Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease and for their families. Our ambition was to provide information to people at the point right after diagnosis, such as explaining what the conditions are and what impact they might have, and also to provide guidance on how to manage the conditions and seek further support. The toolkit is designed so that throughout that healthcare journey, people can use it as a resource to find information and guidance as and when they need it. So additionally, we hoped that it can be utilised as a valuable resource that empowers people to educate others, such as other family members or friends, and even other healthcare providers.
And to begin designing the platform, we brought together key stakeholders, and that include, in this case, parents and caregivers and advocacy representatives and healthcare professionals, including nurses, doctors, and clinicians working in genetics. And we really wanted to determine the educational needs of people with Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease and their families. So these groups were really used to collaboratively design the information that we included. And that includes an educational video that we hope addresses some of the unmet needs we discussed. And during that co-creation process, a number of topics were discussed that directly influenced the design and development of the educational resource. And that included the development of analogies, which we co-designed with participants. And we also understood things like where people would like to be signposted, what style people preferred when kind of watching content, including voiceover, animation style, and key content that we covered. We also included this quote on the left, because we think it really demonstrates the need for this platform and the challenges perhaps that healthcare professionals often face when attempting to educate families.
So how we then went on to approach this challenge was following those insights that were gathered during the focus groups. Our writing team then go on to conduct background research, and we begin planning the actual content. So the flow diagram there sort of shows our process for the script for the video and the content for the toolkit are written. For the video, the script gets transformed into a storyboard, And this just sort of brings the visual directions to life as illustrations. Once this is approved, it goes into animation, and you can sort of see on the right-hand side of the screen there some examples of those storyboard images and the animation. For the online resource, the content is written, including how users can actually navigate from one page to the other and how it all sits on the web page. Once that's approved, it goes into web development and the online resource is created. At each of these different stages, there are multiple review rounds. This is to ensure that the information is clinically accurate and that we're covering all of that correct messaging that we got from the insights. And as part of this process, we continue to work really closely with the CATS Foundation to refine the toolkit and ensure that the content is meaningful and, most importantly, useful to families. And Dan, if you would like to play the video now. So now we'll just give you sort of a quick look at what the online toolkit for Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff looks like. So you'll see here on the homepage, it provides sort of an overview of the different sections. And this is presented as sort of suggested learning pathway. But if you want, you can click to any section and that'll take you right to that page. So just clicking on those orange boxes there. So on this first page, what are Tay-Sachs disease and Sandhoff disease? You'll find that video that I was talking about, which we created with the aims of providing an easy to understand explanation of these diseases. And during the co-creation process, we came to understand that people really want to learn things at different times and at different levels of detail. So by scrolling to the bottom of each of the pages, you'll find signposting to additional information, including links to the CATS information booklets. So these links, in particular, the booklets, provide further information for those that want to learn a bit more. And it's really easy to navigate from one page to the other. You just use the drop-down menus at the top of the page. So, for example, if you click onto the signs and symptoms page, you'll find a lot of information about some of the common signs and symptoms of these diseases, depending on the form of Tay-Sachs or Sandhoff that that individual has. So you can see that information just clicking into the different drop-downs. And once again, there's a lot more information signposted and linked below at the bottom of the page. In the further support section, specifically the support section, there are links to lots of useful resources. So this includes the CATS app, and there's actually a QR code to download that to your phone. And there's a children's book for siblings and the link to download that there. And then we also have links to different Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff charities around the world and a glossary of all those sort of complex medical words that people frequently encounter. There's also a section dedicated to understanding and learning about different clinical studies for people with Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease. And now one of the other key features I mentioned of the toolkit is that it's easy to share the content with family members, friends, or even members of your healthcare team. So clicking the share button up at the top of the page, you can choose from different options for how you want to send that content to others. So that's it. That's just a very brief whistle-stop tour of the online toolkit for Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff, but there's plenty more for you to go and explore and learn about in your own time if you wish.
Thanks, Iona. And we just wanted to share this quote, which hopefully you can read. Apologies about the formatting on some of these slides. But we think it really demonstrates how the co-creation process really enabled us to focus on what the Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff community themselves believes is really important. And hopefully the toolkit goes some way to addressing those needs. So we're really thrilled that you to share that the toolkit is now live and accessible to both the Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff community, but also the general public. You can scan the QR code on screen or use the CATS Foundation website to access the platform. And alternatively, I'll place a web link in the chat of this session that will also take you to the toolkit. And we really encourage you to share with anyone that you think might benefit. The final thing to say from us is just thanks so much for listening, and thanks again for inviting us to speak at the conference. We're very excited for you to use the platform and would love to hear any feedback that you have. And we welcome any questions.
That's brilliant. Thanks, guys. And that's a great overview, I think, of the project. I know that it was an enjoyable one for us all to do. And I know that when we did the focus groups, the content that came out was absolutely fascinating. And I think what's actually been created is going to make a big difference, especially the focus, as we said, this first 12 months, here the first 12 months, again, having access to the real understanding what's the disease, but then where can I get support and what support should I be getting? So thank you again. I'm going to bring back all of our other speakers to join the panel session. So Maria, Nikki, Gisela and Emma. And the plan here of this panel really was for us just to talk about how far we've come in terms of support, but how far should we be looking to go? I mean, what other resources, what other things should we be providing to families in that first 12-month period? So I don't know, Maria, from your perspective, a clinical perspective, what more do you think families want in that first 12-month period they're maybe not getting that we could support with?
Well, I think that families, and thank you, Nikki and Emma, for sharing your story. And I love the pictures of the kids. They're super cute, absolutely cute. I think that we need more psychological support for our families. We have a psychologist here, but we don't usually involve them routinely because they have a huge amount of patients, and it's a service that is quite limited. So I think that there is a concept in US. I don't know if this is existing in Europe. The term is grief therapy, and I think that I talked with you about this, Dan. So I think that we need to support our families in going through this grief process from the very beginning, and the young adults too with this disease. That would be one of the things that come immediately to my mind, but I would love to know your thoughts also about this.
That's super interesting. Emma, what's your views on the grief therapy side of things?
Yeah, I totally agree with Maria there. I don't think there's enough understanding or support about the anticipatory grief you go through from that initial diagnosis, told that your child's being told that your child is terminally ill and they, possibly won't live till 5 years old is a huge step. And then to try and live your life knowing this fact and not really knowing when this is going to happen, it's tough. And I think people do manage, but I think I would have definitely benefited from some kind of support to help understand and deal with it, for sure. Yeah, and I think our families would. And I think there's almost a assumption that there is going to be something there. You have this news and you're like, right, who's going to help me? I need this help. I really need help now to figure this out so I can focus on looking after my child. And it's not there, not here that I'm aware of, as I say, apart from the support from the CATS Foundation. But as far as clinical, psychological help, there isn't anything.
That's interesting. So question for you, Nikki, then, in terms of advocacy, what do you think we should be doing as groups to support families here? Is it signposting, or is there more you think we should be doing?
Emma and I are honestly always looking for ways to improve. We're often having different discussions, looking for feedback, trying new ideas. We're always trying to think of how we can help further. We've come a long way, and our projects they go through very well, but we're always trying to see what we can do better. I think that the grief counselling is a very good idea, and not something I particularly focused on, not just when your child passes, but there are lots of different stages. So that could be something we look at from the beginning. We've looked at buddy systems, connecting families together with other families that are in similar stages, and that seems to work well. To have that person that just on the end of the messaging that not only Emma and I, but also, you know, in another family in a similar situation. So that's something we look to do. I'm not sure. You know, we're open to any suggestions.
From a clinical perspective, sorry.
No, don't worry, please go.
From a clinical perspective, I think that we don't have any guideline about GM1 and GM2. So if you search for a guideline, you don't find it. And we need a standard global clinical care guidelines for patients with GM1 and GM2. This would be very convenient for physicians worldwide or nurses at local hospitals, at specialized hospitals, and also for families, because they can see something written with the standard care, and maybe they know what to ask for. And I think that, for example, for San Filippo, this was done 1 year ago. One of the maybe Stop San Filippo, or Cure San Filippo Foundation.
It was, yeah. I was gonna give them a name drop as well. They did an amazing clinical guidelines.
So the patients led this initiative, which I think is great, because you can filter also these recommendations and include your perspective as a patient or as a family. And I think that is amazing. Yeah.
I think it's an amazing job that all the different groups of San Filippo did to actually not just create this content that's useful, but then to get it translated in multiple languages and then into the clinic and then to get publications to have people using it. But it's made me think, when I was reading through it, the content is fantastic. I think a challenge now is how they can translate that to families. So Lewi, Iona, how you would get these clinical guidelines into a format that's accessible and easy for families. I know this is something that Cognitant does, but it'd be good to get your perspective on how you can translate this kind of clinical, this is what you do, manage a disease, manage from going through a pathway, how you can translate that content into something that families can really get to grips with and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we, for context, work across lots of therapy areas. And we see this mirrored within almost every therapy area, that actually families, patients, caregivers, whoever, just really isn't able to access and doesn't understand the information that they're being provided with. There's often really great resources out there, but people just can't access them. They're not in a format that people can read or understand, or, as you alluded to, Dan, they're not in a language that people can read. So that's why I think we were really passionate about this project. Probably me more so than anyone, as my background is as an academic, researching in this field. But we were really passionate about co-creating everything we make with families. We think we know as a company what people want and the formats, but actually it's different for every single person in every therapy area. So taking the time to embed that within the process, I think, is critical to make sure that people is in a format people want, but actually is meaningful and useful and contains information that people want. And yeah, as I said during our presentation, we hope that the toolkit goes some way to address that, but we're aware that there is lots of additional scope that can be added, and languages and all those sorts of things, and that is really something that we hope to build on as we progress. I don't know, Iona, if you have anything to add.
No, just quite similar. I mean, you alluded to the fact that there's so much information out there that it can almost be a bit overwhelming sometimes, and that's a key part of it as well, is like you say, giving people the information at the right time and helping them go through those clinical guidelines step by step and understanding what that means at each stage. So yeah, like Lewi said, it's something that we're really passionate about, is helping that communication of information and aiding that in somewhat. Yeah.
That's because it's made me think back to all the work that Gisela, you've done with Azafaros on a lot of the content in a format that families understand in terms of natural histories. And I think from today, that first 12-month period is sometimes we may give people a lot of information. Maybe sometimes we give them too much to process in that first 12 months. And I'm sure you face that challenge in industry, is that you have all this technical information about clinical trials that may be happening, about drugs, about molecules. It's how you can face the challenge of communicating that with families and how you go about that process. I mean, it'll be interesting to get your views on where you think that advocacy can step in and potentially save a lot of these kind of conversations in an easier format for them.
Yeah, I think it's crucial to work with advocacy because most of you have lived the first year journey, right? So you know exactly what you need at the right time. I can imagine that initially you only want to know and to learn about the diagnosis. So on clinical studies, it can be in a much further after a year or much further. So I think having a platform like a patient organization website or a company website or clinical.gov, where you can go wherever you want to go, I think that's crucial. Also, I realized that clinical.gov is sometimes very complicated for families and for patients. So I think we all can work together with clinicians and patient organizations to make it more readable and understandable, balanced for patients, so that for families, that they can make the right decision. So I think we should maybe more deliver information in phases. I agree, and I think we can learn from you all how quick or how low the pace has to be, right? So it's more. It's really working together and learning from you, I think. And also, one thing I wanted to mention is that if there are outcomes, hopefully good outcomes of any clinical study, that it would be interesting also to work with patient organizations and physicians to make it more readable, the publications for patients, so like manuscript in translation or something like that, so that people really know what the outcome is, and then they can make a proper decision on using it or not. So it's really, we all have the obligation to educate and inform in the best way, in phases. I agree. Yeah.
It's super interesting because I do remember that, again, when Emily is diagnosed, reading multiple journals, having no idea what they were saying. And then you have to teach yourself basic science to really understand gangliosidosis, what enzymes do.
Yeah, and maybe there is a role for all of us that if there is an important publication, that you can, I don't know if that's possible, to make a sort of readable abstract. I don't know. We have to look into it if it's possible, but then explain what it's read. Sometimes you only go to the conclusion, right? Because then it's more.
That's it. Abstract conclusion. So Maria, from your perspective, do you find sometimes that families will come in having read these scientific journals and articles, and do they understand what they're reading? I know I used to, sometimes blag it a bit and understand what I understood and kind of make up bits that I thought I understood. Because it takes a long time to really understand the language, the terminology, because it's very technical. I'm wondering if that's something you've ever experienced.
When a patient is being referred to our center, to our hospital, after being diagnosed with this disease, we usually like that the referring clinician who has been in contact with this family and is the familiar face that the family knows, break the news to the family. And then I'm explaining this to give you an answer to your question. And then maybe 1 week later, we will see the family, because if we see the family 48 hours later, unfortunately, they will be in a very bad position from an emotional perspective. They will be crying all the time, and we will not be able to work together as a team. It's not about that. We don't feel uncomfortable with people crying. Well, it breaks my heart, but that is my job. I mean, not breaking the people's heart, but being in that position and cope with that. But I think that is very inefficient if we see the families 48 hours of breaking the news with the diagnosis. So we give them some time, and usually they Google it, of course. They don't usually mention papers or specific articles from scientific journals in the first appointment. Maybe that comes later. It depends a lot of the family. I mean, some family, they have, for example, here in UK, we have many families who are coming from abroad. We have refugees from different countries, many families that they don't speak our language. So for them, some of them, they don't have access to the internet. So I cannot really generalize. Maybe the family who is going to look for papers in a scientific journal is a very specific family with well educated, able to use the internet, understanding English, reading in English. But most of the time, they don't understand this information, because this information is also very, very hard to me to understand the data. To give a meaning or interpretation of the data is very complicated, even for physicians or for us. We have the background of the disease, but just a few of us are involved in clinical trials, for example, or in basic science. So I think that is difficult for all of us. Yeah, being honest. Yeah.
That's super interesting. Again, it's bringing back lots of memories of the process we all go through on coping strategies, and I know that that's something that Emma and Nikki, CATS have done a lot of work on, and many of the other patient groups have done as well, to make sure that we can help families through those early stages of diagnosis, so we can ask the questions and prepare them, so that they're not going in blind when they're going to see their doctors or the clinicians all the time, that they know what to expect. I think we're just coming up for time of the panel. So I don't know if there's any closing comments anyone wants to share before we hit a break. I don't know, Lewi, anything you want to add on the work that you're doing and how you could potentially support things going forward in terms of clinical guidelines?
Yeah, I guess I was just picking up, I've seen that you shared it, Dan, but I was just picking up on Ruben's comment and reading that, and definitely it's really great to see that manuscripts and journals are expecting that there's lay versions. You can also, I see some really wonderful visual abstracts that people have generated, and I think they really support with understanding. In terms of, I guess, moving forwards, we're really aware that this is the first phase of the toolkit. And yeah, we're definitely open to feedback on how we can improve it, or what would be useful to develop within that. So please do let us know, or let Dan know, or the CATS Foundation, and they can pass it on to us. Yeah. Fantastic.
So we'll end the panel there. We've got a short break for 10 minutes before we all join again. But as during the break, I'm going to play a short video that was mentioned in the toolkit, which is what was put together to explain what is Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff. So thank you very much to all of our panelists and speakers from the first part of today. We'll be back in 10 minutes. I'm going to put this video up, and I will see you all soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
If someone you care for is affected by Tay-Sachs or Sandhoff disease, you may be wondering what this means. Keep watching the video to find out more. What are Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease? Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease are part of a group of diseases called GM2 gangliosidosis. They are rare inherited diseases that affect the brain. There are three main variants of the diseases, which are classified by the age of onset. These are infantile, juvenile, and late onset. A condition is considered rare if it affects less than 1 in 2,000 people. There are approximately 300 million people worldwide impacted by rare diseases. Everyone has an instruction manual needed for their body to work. These instructions are known as genes and are passed on from parents to child. Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease are caused when a child has been passed on 2 copies of a certain gene that has changes or mutations. They inherit 1 copy from each parent. Parents can be a carrier for these mutated genes without being affected by the disease. These genetic changes are not something that can be prevented. What happens inside the brain in Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease? In someone not affected by Tay-Sachs or Sandhoff, the cells of the brain work like a factory. The genes instruct how many workers there needs to be and what their jobs are. When the factory is working efficiently, it produces a molecule called GM2, which helps the brain work efficiently. Once GM2 has done its job, it's then sorted and removed by a group of factory workers called HEX-A. However, in people with Tay-Sachs or Sandhoff disease, the mutated genes mean there aren't enough HEX-A workers. This means GM2 can't be removed properly, and it starts to build up, until the factory, the brain, is unable to work as well as it should. This leads to problems with thinking and speaking. It also causes problems with movement of the body, such as standing, walking, and eating. Common symptoms of Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease may include fits or seizures, muscle weakness and loss of muscle tone, particularly affecting the chest and stomach area, increased jumpiness to unexpected noises, reduced coordination, delay reaching development milestones such as sitting or walking, difficulty with speech, inability to eat unassisted, and difficulties with thinking and learning. Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease are progressive and multi-system conditions. This means that in time, more parts of the body and bodily functions will be affected, and the person will need more assistance. Unfortunately, these conditions also lead to a limited life expectancy. Whilst there is currently no cure, treatment for Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease focuses on helping parents and their families to manage and ease the effects of the diseases. The healthcare team involved in supporting people with these conditions and their families may include specialist neurologists, physiotherapists, and dietitians, amongst others. At first, a diagnosis may be overwhelming and can make those impacted and their families feel isolated. But although Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease are considered rare, there is a strong community providing support to families, such as the CATS Foundation. It may take time to adjust to living with Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease, but eventually these changes can become a new normal. Together, families and friends can support one another and provide those affected by GM2 gangliosidosis with the best possible life.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the second half of today's conference. I hope you enjoyed the first half where we focused on the 12-month experience from some of our attendees. I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker and introduce Daisy, who's from Sanofi, who will be giving a really fascinating talk about the caregiver experience and the work that Sanofi have done on this topic. So Daisy, I'm going to put your slides up. You should be able to navigate them through, and I'll leave you to introduce yourself and your session. So thank you very much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you so much for your invitation. I'm very glad to be here to present some of the work that Sanofi has already prepared to help the community of GM1 and GM2. So a little background about myself is that I am a researcher and I've been in industry for over 20 years. And I have always been in the chronic disease space. This is a new territory for me to embark on, and I'm very excited to be in the rare disease space, supporting the health outcomes and economic evaluation of any of the product that the company is supporting. And in particular, for this little journey that I had with Sanofi for the past 2 months, I feel really deeply impressed and also affected by the rare disease community. I went to the North community and the conferences and met so many advocacy groups and also patients, and the information exchanges are so genuine and also very important for us to help the community. So here I am today. I want to share our experience, our work about the experience of caregivers of individuals living with GM1 and GM2 gangliosidosis. Let me advance my slide. Yes, as I mentioned, I'm an employee of Sanofi. That's my disclosure. So let me begin by saying very briefly about what is GM1, GM2 gangliosidosis. I'm sure that you are quite familiar with it, but just to set the level setting here is that we understand that these diseases are rare and devastating neurodegenerative disorder, currently without a cure or any specific treatment. And we understand that the GM1 and GM2 gangliosidosis are neurodegenerative lysosomal storage disorders. And based on the age of onset and the rate of progression of the disease, there are 3 to 4 categories that we can subtype it: the infantile, late infantile, juvenile, and late onset. And also because we understand that these are the progressive symptoms and it affects the patient's functioning and also impact their daily lives. And to what extent that we understand these important symptoms affecting the patients and also affecting the caregivers. And that's what we want to discuss today. And the focus of our discussion today or our exchange today is to bring you up to speed about one of the studies that we conducted in the past year. That is to understand the responsibility, the roles about the caregivers who are supporting individuals with the disorder of GM1 and GM2 gangliosidosis. And also not just the role and responsibility, we also want to understand how the caregiving experience impact the caregiver's life in terms of the physical, emotional, functional, financial, and other social aspects as well. So want to make sure that you understand what we are going to talk about is the caregiver's experiences in terms of the responsibilities and the impact, and how we craft these information to be presentable to you is that, first of all, let's begin with understanding who are these caregivers. We ask them, for example, the question on the right-hand side: how long have you been taking care of the primary role as a caregiver for the person? And in particularly important is the second domain that we want to ask: what is your typical day of providing care for these important individuals of yours? And how about the impact? Does providing care, support, assistance impact your life, either positively or negatively? And what type of resources are they receiving? and what other supports that our caregivers told us that they may need in the future. So that's the overall of what we are going to talk today. So let's begin. This is the study about 29 caregivers that participated in this qualitative study. And you can see here that we have 29 caregivers, and 7 of them are taking care of the children in the age of 6 to 11. 9 of them are taking care of the adolescents in the age of 12 to 17. And 13 of them are taking care of adult above the age of 18. So you can see it's almost equally split in terms of the age from adult versus the children, the pediatric population. For the age of the caregivers, the mean age is about 49 years of age. So it's during their work productive years, and ranging from 37 to 75 years of age. A majority of these caregivers are female, 79% of them. And currently, during the time of the study, 62% of caregivers are not employed for full-time employment. So some of them have been or are still maintaining a job full-time, or 17% of them are doing the part-time work. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see that these 29 caregivers are taking care of the individuals living with the disease. And you can see majority of these patients in our sample are female, 72% of them. And also majority of them, I would say about 59%, are suffering from the GM2 gangliosidosis, and 41% are the GM1. Within the GM2 gangliosidosis, majority of them, again, is the Tay-Sachs. That's reflective of the disease, the nature of the disease. So that's the general description of the sample. Now let's take a look at the caregiver's responsibilities. Remember earlier I said, what is your typical day? The caregiver told us that their typical day actually is nonstop, pervasive, and often do it alone. And looking at different sets of the activities and also responsibilities, I laid it out for you that the first most mentioned activities or responsibilities for caregivers are the activities of daily living. Now that span from feeding, making sure that they dress up, the patient dressed, bathing, lifting, mobility. And you can see here, those are some of the quotes that I would like to share with you today. The caregiver of a child suffering from the GM2, and she mentioned about that the following. She could never really care for herself in a sense. She has never been able to dress herself. She's never been able to go to the bathroom by herself. The next caregiver mentioned about is taking to the bathroom, to the restroom, for example, bathing them, feeding them, making food for them, giving them the drugs, the medication that they need. Besides taking care of the daily activities of their loved ones, the second most mentioned about their responsibilities are managing the symptoms, managing the care. That includes ensuring the safety of the individuals. For example, making sure they don't fall, making sure that the heart rates are right, the appointments, remembering to monitor the medication, and so forth. And the caregiver of a child mentioned about is that we have to make sure that she doesn't choke on the foods that we do give her. It has to be blended food or soft foods. The other caregiver of an adolescent mentioned about is, for example, because every morning you are planning for a different circumstance, which doctor to take him to, which therapy you have to take him to, which medications. So those are the symptoms that I just quote for you. But on the other hand, The other important responsibility of our caregiver is also to provide a quality care, providing the quality of life of their loved ones. So in that sense, they were thinking about is the entertainment, the education, the relationship for every individual who would like to have. So one of the quote from our caregiver of an adult is the following. In her case, she never had friends. So as an adolescent, I was trying to make her friends. I make friends with mothers who had daughters and said, would you please play with my daughter? If you are having a party, would you please have them invite her? I was her advocate for our social life, and I am her social life. The other aspect of the responsibility also include the physical health, making sure that we'll help them to exercise, maintaining the strength of the muscles, and also the emotional health. Besides the quality of life, the emotional health the caregiver also provided for their loved ones, making sure that they are happy, they understand their emotions at the time. So these are just a summary of the responsibilities of the caregivers. And they mentioned that they often do it alone. Why this is so? The caregivers told us that they often do not have the trusted, reliable assistants that can provide a good care for their loved ones. And sometimes they are reluctant to accept help. And here are some of the quotes from our caregiver of a child. He said, and you can't trust to leave your children with anybody else either. The caregiver of an adolescent mentioned about it's also difficult because even though, yes, we do have people we can count on, we don't have a lot of people who can back us up just because of the care involved or just that knowledge well. What if something significant happened to us, the parents? What would happen? The caregiver of an adult mentioned about, honestly, just someone to lean on sometimes. I just don't have that. I have my girls, and I don't want to put that on them, obviously. They are young and had enough to deal with. Without that, I have myself. That's it. So we can see the caregivers right now, they told us they do not have the extended help. But when we asked them about what other sources of support that they can rely on, and they told us really reliably they will go to the advocacy groups like CATS Foundation, like Anti-SAD, like Cure GM1 Foundation, the advocacy groups that they would like to go to, they can rely on. That's the primary source of support. And you can see that these are the quotes from our caregiver. Perhaps we can go through one or two of them. The first one they mentioned to us is that, they know, and they are always a good place to go. But the person I trust most is my wife. She does all the research. And I always say she is the general, and I'm the ground troops. And the other caregiver of a child mentioned about is the other parents, the Anti-SAD Facebook page, or the Cure GM1 page, Facebook page, is the absolute best place to go. Or they will say to us about the special needs parent, even if they are not the GM1 moms, if there is something comes up, you go on Facebook and you find groups and you say, hey, what are you doing and how is it working at your house? So that's the support that they seek, and the patient advocacy group becomes the real support for them. And thanks so much for doing so. On the other hand, what about the medical community? what type of support, or how do our caregivers perceive this type of support? So the mention to us is that, yes, they will receive support from the medical. However, the information that they receive are quite limited. And here are what they have told us. For example, the caregiver of an adolescent mentioned about the doctor told them about the diagnosis, the prognosis, and what would happen in the future, and that was it. What about the child? The caregiver of a child mentioned about, when we got the diagnosis, it was like, here's your information, now you need to go drive home. The caregiver of an adult mentioned about, I don't get any support from any medical. We have a neurologist that my wife doesn't particularly care. We haven't gone to see him in years, actually. And you can see that's the difference between which sources of support that our caregiver rely on. And with all these responsibilities and support that they receive, our caregivers told us that they have experienced a lot of the impact on them. As you see here from this word cloud, the larger the word, of course, are the most impactful burden on them. As you can imagine, the physical, emotional, psychological, and also financial strain on these caregivers are also very prominent here. Now, our caregivers also told us some of the positive revelations in the course of providing care, assistance, and support to their loved one. And that's very important to bear in mind. They can build relationship with others. For example, the caregiver of an adult mentioned about that they met amazing people because of his wife. I have the honor of pushing her chair. She's a celebrity. At the same time, the caregiver told us some of the positive revelation in terms of their own personal development. They become more compassionate. They are open. We are just like, if you see a mom somewhere and they are having a bad day, it's kind of like, I've got you. At the same time, within the family becomes more cohesive. They help each other out in this circumstance. For example, the caregiver of a child mentioning about is that he is the brother of the patient. He's a caretaker as well. We refer ourselves as a team, all of us. And I ask him for something, he just jumped right up. He's very kind to her and inclusive. And I feel like it's a very positive effect on him. Now, looking at the broader community support, the caregiver of a child mentioning about is the outpouring from friends who have rallied for the patient, and also is very, very, very pleasing to see that it's right before they came out, the neighbors did a bottle and also drive to give her the money to travel to the event. So that's also the outpouring support from the community they receive. And also looking at their life outlook from the caregiver of an adolescent mentioned to us is like, I feel like my son has been my greatest teacher. He taught me unconditional love and how to give that. So that's positive, definitely. So you can see there are a lot of good revelations coming out from providing care of the loved ones. So at the same time, we understand that the caregiver providing responsibilities, providing this care for our patients, they also need to receive care and also support from our communities. So what type of resources that our caregivers told us they would like to receive? For example, first off, the education awareness. The caregiver of the adolescent mentioned about is, I would really like to see doctors and specialists who have better access, at least, to the information about the disease. So more education. Let me see what's going on here. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. And also in terms of the resources, they would like to receive more information about the treatment. Currently, even though there is no treatment, but what do they want from a treatment perspective? So the patient told us, the caregivers told us, is that there might be something that could stop the disease, improve it a little bit. That's important. Yes, prolong the progression would be considered as a good treatment. Stop the progress, improve it, and I would feel then my life was not lived for nothing. So that's very important. From the equipment perspective, what type of resources can we provide besides the jumping hoops? This is quite an interesting quote. I would like to read it to you. So the caregiver of a child mentioning about is the availability to equipment and things like that. There's so many details in caring for these children and equipment, even as simple as gloves for your hands, so that my child's not biting at her hand or mine. So it's a very simple thing that we took it for granted, but those are important for our caregivers as well as the patients. From the financial perspective, the resources that they would need would be, for example, here, it would really be great if I could get paid for my services, taking care of the girls because we've lost the income of my employment. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, over 60% of these caregivers, they are not employed full-time. So income has become a great challenge for them. So at the same time, what type of importance of the support that our caregivers would like to receive? Continuously, you can imagine, is the emotional support. Our caregiver of a child mentioning about is actually having therapists that specialize with children, complex children that we have, to help you understand that it will be okay, kind of navigate the different stages, the grieving process, just having someone to talk to that truly understands. So it's the emotion, from that emotional support to understand the patient's need. What about the government support? Well, now you say that they mentioned about. In the States, in the United States that I'm in, if there could be any financial help, if I could get paid to be the caregiver, that would be amazing, similar to the one that we mentioned earlier. As well as the other piece here is interesting. We are about 2 years ago to the city and back to get the approval, to get the RAM and the special. We cannot hear, but you can understand what that could be. We had problems with the city, and that they said, no, you can't do it with the RAM and the additions and other things. So this is the kind of support that we need to provide to the family so that we'll enable the family to live a better, smoother life, daily life. From the community awareness and services perspective, the caregivers told us that they would like the community being more understandable, understanding this is the physical challenge and to get more seriously. At the same time, as we mentioned about earlier, that our caregivers told us that a lot of times they do it on their own. So they would like to have some time of their respite. It's like finding those people who are skilled, that have quality or qualified, that you can trust, and that truly will do the things that are difficult to do for your child. Learn your child, and then keep them. And these people are hard to find. Or the other caregiver told us about this instance is I sit with my son and let me decompress a little bit. Just be there for him. If anything were to happen, allow me a little time to decompress. So you can see decompression. Our caregivers also need a break. And this is something that we can also help to provide to our caregivers as well. Now, all in all, we can see we have come to the conclusion. I have shown you a lot of the responsibilities our caregivers are providing to our to their loved ones, ranging from the daily activities to the managing the symptoms, the care, to the emotion, quality of life of the patients. At the same time, as the disease progresses, caregivers' responsibilities definitely will increase. And we need to make sure that we will provide a lot of the support to caregivers, ranging from the government support, our communities, within the family, the patient advocacy groups. So all these, we have to work together to provide support for the community of our patients, of our caregivers. So here, all in all, what I'm advocating for you is we need to provide a lot of the assistance and awareness to the community at large, and making sure that all these important responses, important information to be shared across, so that the additional support can be given to the GM1 and GM2 community for the patient as well as for the caregivers. So as a closing thoughts, I would like to mention to you that this is how I personally think about the disease and the community. We always talk about the patient centricity. And here, not just the patient, but it's the family centricity. And we're talking about it's not a destination, but it's a journey. It's a journey of partnership, where empathy, communication pave for the way for better health outcomes and a brighter future. And here, the next page is for the acknowledgement for all those participants and foundations who have helped us with this research. And I close it for now. Dan, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, my bad. I say it's a very interesting study, especially when I reflect back to personal experience as a carer. And one of the things I always remember is how it just catches up with you over time, and you don't realize how much you're actually doing until someone points it out and you go out for support and help. But then you get told, I know we were told this, well, you're managing okay now, why do you need support? And so one of the pieces of advice we're always giving to our families is to get care in place very early on, so you have it when you need it. You don't want to be in a position when you then have to negotiate why you need a nighttime carer for a child who sleeps 3 hours during the night and you have to suction and everything. The reality is that should be in place before you get to that position. So I think this is a fascinating study, and I'm sure we'll be able to share some information on it, signpost people if they want more information. So thank you very much. I know you're going to be joining a panel shortly, so I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So thank you very much, Daisy. And our next speaker is Maria. So Maria joins us from EURORDIS to talk through patients at the Centre of Innovation, to talk about a lot of the work that EURORDIS are doing, how they're bringing the patient voice and how it drives forward a lot of their work. So Maria, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and your session. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dan, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's my second year in this conference, and I'm very happy to share with you my thoughts and what we are doing at EURORDIS. So as I would like to drive you through the agenda, what I will be speaking today about is about the whole rare disease ecosystem and the work we are doing at EURORDIS in our three main pillars, which we advocate for patients' rights, we empower patients, and we partner with patients in order to foster innovations and hopefully new treatments for rare diseases. So a bit about me, I'm pharmacist by training, and I'm based in Barcelona, in Spain. And here in the right side you can see our offices, which are very nice. We work in an old hospital, modernist, so we are very lucky. And I've been working in EURORDIS since 2018 as patient engagement manager, and my main role is to engage patients in in regulatory activities at the European Medicines Agency, and also in European initiatives projects that are funded by the EU. And then I'm working very closely with patients and families, and my passion is about access to medicines and involvement of young patients, more precisely. So in my free time, I'm always traveling for work, but when I can, I also travel for some holidays. I'm very Mediterranean. If you know me, I'm always looking for sun and sea. And in my free time, I try to play the guitar and read some good books. So that was about me. So as we cannot meet face to face, you know a bit more about myself. So what we are doing at EURORDIS, and EURORDIS, for the ones who are not aware, EURORDIS, or Rare Disease Europe, we were funded, created in 1997. So almost a quarter, 25 years ago. And our work has been always in an international scape. And as we've been created by 4 French associations for French rare diseases, and our initial goal was to advocate for European laws in order to bring medicines to people living with rare disease. So at that time, in 1997, there was no specific law for orphan medicines. So that was the main ask for EURORDIS to the European Commission and to the other stakeholders to bring that. So we've been always working in this collaborative way within different members and different countries, and that's very important for us. So as most of you know, we have more than 6,000 rare disease nowadays, between 7,000, still are around having fixed numbers, but half of them affects almost 70% affects children, and from this 70%, 1/3 is estimated that will not get through 5 years old. So it's a really a challenging problem that affects in Europe 30 million people, but overall in the US and in all countries worldwide 300 million. So 70%, as you might know, are from genetic rare diseases, and this is also now our focus in EURORDIS, on working a lot on newborn screening and genetic diseases. So this is a snapshot on the current global landscape, and here I'm more linked to the main challenges that we live in Europe. Is, as you know, as I've just mentioned, that 70% affect children with low prognostics, and we experience in Europe significant inequalities when it comes to access to drugs, but also access to care. And this indeed leads us to that only 5% or 6% of rare disease have a treatment, but nowadays it's just some of them or most of them for symptomatic treatments, not transformative. So there's still a lot of work to do in the area. And within EURORDIS, we've worked in a project called Rare 2030, and we are also part of IRDIR, the International Rare Disease and Research Consortium, that we have this aim to have around 1,000 new therapies by 2030. So a lot of work to do. So our main vision since it was created 25 years ago is been to improve the life of these people living with rare disease, in order to have not only a longer life, but a better quality of life, in order to reach a full potential and well-being, and that the patients living with rare disease are included in the society and leaving no one behind. So we would like to see these patients or people living with rare disease being recognized as equal citizens and having their full rights fully respected, and that's very important. And of course, we want them to be diagnosed timely, so early, because nowadays we have a delay on around 5 years to diagnose, depending on which country in Europe. And we want also an accurate diagnosis, because that's very important in terms of when we will treat them, on what we will treat them. So, and we would like to have these patients supported with the best care and also the social care, and if possible to be cured. So, and as I mentioned, to be included them in the society in all aspects, and that they could live an independent life and a fulfilled life. So that's how we work, and we are, our members are in more than 74 countries, not only in Europe, but all along. We work very closely with NORD, that has been just mentioned, with the US rare disease patient organizations, with Rare Disease International, so worldwide, and we are all working across borders to improve the people's life. So nowadays, and we have 1,051 patient organizations, and we cover more than 2,000, 3,000 diseases. So we work in 3 main offices. So we have our offices in Barcelona, and I just mentioned, in Paris and in Brussels, and we are more than 50 staff members. And we work also with our volunteers and our members who give support to our different initiatives. I'll share the slides so you can have all these handy if needed. So as I mentioned, our strategy, we work in 3 main pillars. So we advocate for patients' rights in the main institutions such as the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Medicines Agencies, and also nationally through our national alliances and European federations. We empower patients through our open academy trainings, specifically on medicines research and on medicine research and development, but also on translational research. And we partner with patients through our different projects and also main activities. And here are the different areas of work that we work. So from research to medicines development, patient access, diagnosis, healthcare services, and social policies. So a wide range. Now we are also getting into mental health, which is very important and highly in the agenda of the European Commission. So you would wonder how we work, no, how we are funded, and this is we are very transparent. We have of course auditoring every year, because we have half of our fundings from public funding. So 30%, almost like 26%, comes from the European Commission. Then we have another third of our funding is from our members, so from their membership fees that they pay to EURORDIS. And then, of course, we have funding from the healthcare sector and some donations from philanthropy and foundations and non-for-profit. So we are non-for-profit, so all our revenue goes with all our expenses, mainly to cover staff costs, traveling, volunteers, and logistic services, etc. So this is our financial account from last year, and it's public as well in the website. So how we advocate for the patients' right, or what have been doing for these 25 years. So as I mentioned, we started in 1997, mainly focused on drug development, on how to bring orphan drugs to patients. So we advocate for the regulation in 2000, the one that is now being reviewed and might change in a couple of years or more maybe. And then in 2008, we created the first Rare Disease Day. So that was a big milestone to bring all the community together from different countries worldwide, and all together being united in a day and being proud of being rare. So from that, I wanted to highlight also another of our milestones, which was the published of report of the Rare 2030, which was this foresight study on how we would like to see the future on rare diseases in policy by 2030. And you can find it online, and it's also linked in these slides. And then in 2021, we had the adoption from the United Nations resolution on addressing the challenges of persons living with a rare disease. And this was a big milestone, because it was from the United Nations was confirmed the need, and it was in the agenda. So it was a high level event in New York. So this is, I mentioned, one of our first results after our advocacy around 2000. It was the publishing of the EU regulation, but also we've been involved in advocating for the one on pediatric use in 2006, advanced therapies, cross-border healthcare, among others. And then, as I mentioned, the Rare Disease Day was launched in 2008, but nowadays it's over 100 countries, and that was the and at the upcoming day will be the 29th of February in 2024. So we'll be, actually it's always the 29th, but of course the other years we celebrate on the 28th. So we are very happy that next year we will be celebrating on the 29th of February. So this is the Rare 2030 recommendations that I just mentioned. Is this foresight study based on policy, and we had more than 2,000 experts from all different stakeholders, industry, regulators, patients, policymakers, in order to see which case or in which scenario we would like to be in 2030, and how to advocate, and which policies would need to have to be there by then and to have in place. So of course I highly recommend you to go through and to have a look at the recommendations. And these 8 main recommendations that have been published in the Rare 2030 are in line with our main advocacy plan that we are working now on, having an European action plan on rare diseases. So all this is in line with the 4 sustainable and development strategic goals. So we would like to see, and we are asking already the Commission for a couple of years, that the Commission should take a step forward and make an action plan specific for rare disease in an European level that then can be downstream to national level. So that's more recently what we've been doing in terms of advocacy. And of course, as I mentioned, we are very proud that the rare disease has been in the agenda of the United Nations, and not only in the event that I mentioned in New York in 2021, but this year also has been mentioned. So here is. This means that we bring the rare disease, bring rare disease attention at global level, and of course in the General Assembly of the United Nations. So here I will give you all these slides for background. So how we empower and we partner with patients. And this, I was presenting this last year in these same conferences, so I will not go through again, but just to mention that we have these patient engagement managers, that we are different people working in different stakeholders in order to bring the patient's voice. So we have me, like in this case, that I mainly bring patient's voice in regulatory decisions at the European medicines, also with payers in Europe, but then we have other colleagues working with HTA bodies, so health technology assessments, with industry through community advisory boards, and also in research and healthcare providers within the European reference networks that for sure you are familiar with. We are also partners in the European Joint Program on Rare Diseases, where we have published a co-creation guidelines for patient engagement in research project, which is available online for your attention. And also we are now working on digital health and how to involve patients more on that. So as I mentioned before, we have our trainings, the Open Academy. We started in 2008, so it's been already quite a lot of years. We've trained more than 600 patients, and since 2014, we are also including researchers. So which has been very enriching for both, for patients and researchers to meet and to brainstorm. So we empower these patients, and in order to bring their expertise into the activities that I showed before, so with the regulators, with the HTAs, and with all the stakeholders. And I wanted here just to share with you some of the main conferences or EURORDIS as a network leverager. So where we try to bring all the community together, so all 1,000 members that we have, all these patient organizations, we try to meet them yearly. So this year next year, sorry. In 2024, we will meet in Brussels for the European conferences on rare disease. And I'm kindly inviting you all to go through to the webpage and learn more about the event. And it will be hybrid, so you can join online or you can come to Brussels. And in the European Conference on Rare Disease, we have different tracks, different sessions on different topics, from research, from newborn screening to drug development, social care, policy. So it's a very wide agenda, and we have all the stakeholders. So we have clinicians, industry, patients. So it's a very enriching conferences for rare diseases. What we also do, and so next year we will have ECRD. So the other year we have the EURORDIS membership meeting. So we meet also with all our members, and we have the same structure. So we have we have mainly topics that are for interest for the community, and we have 2 days, 3 days all together to meet and to exchange. Then we also have the Black Pearl Awards, and there's a photo contest of living with a rare disease until the 31st of January. So please go and vote or submit your picture. This one is the one that won last year. We also have the Rare Disease Day, as I mentioned, but also the Rare Disease Week, where we try to train patients on the European advocacy in Brussels. So we go to the Parliament, we have courses on specifically the role of the European Parliament, the Commission, the Council, and how patients can advocate and influence in the European institutions. Then we also have our podcast, Rare on Air, that I suggest you, if you're interested, to follow, and the Rare Barometer. The Rare Barometer is a new program that we do surveys to have evidence-based results to do our advocacy. So now there is, I think, or will be out a new survey on access to medicines in Europe. So we have, I think, around 2,000, I would say, experts that are registered that take part of these surveys, and from that results, like gathering all the community from Europe and beyond, we can inform better our policy ask and our advocacy. So I think with that, I would like to thank you. I hope I stick on the time. And here I leave you my email in case you have any other questions. But as always, I think Dan will share the slides, or I can share with them. Okay.
Thank you, Maria. No, fantastic talk. And I have to say that the EURORDIS ECRD is one of the first rare disease events I went to many years ago, and it's where I met lots of people, made lots of contacts, and met other families who've been through similar experiences, especially on the advocacy side. And I think it's a great opportunity if families can attend virtual or in person to really learn some more if that's what they're interested in. And I know the Open Academy is a fantastic program that many friends have been through and learned so much. And so again, if anyone's interested, I really recommend them looking into that. And please feel free to reach out to myself or Maria for more detail on that.
Yeah, if just I may, on this Open Academy, I mean, you can enroll also in the courses, but we have already a lot of courses that are online for free. So you can do the whole week in Barcelona for the training, or you can just do your own blended training online for free whenever it works best for you. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Maria. So I'm going to get our next speaker on. And I'm really pleased to welcome Allan. So Allan is a good friend of mine. We met many, many years ago. We both serve on the LSD UK Collaborative, and Allan represents the Pompe Support Network in the UK. And Allan's going to talk about the journey he's been on personally and also within advocacy to really show what it's like, I suppose, when treatments become available, and then how that impacts the community as well. So Allan, I'm going to add your slides to the stage and leave it for you to talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan, and hello everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this. I must say it's been quite a challenge to stick to the brief, but hopefully I will give you an impression of what we went through, which is a little different these days because things have moved on, structures in the NHS and all sorts of things, but hopefully we'll show you some of the things, and not all bad, but having a treatment was a fantastic event. And hopefully I'll give that impression, although I'm sure I pointed a few negatives. But just to introduce myself, I have a Pompe boy. My wife and I, we call him a boy. He's actually 34 years old now, but because of him, I've been plunged into this world of advocacy, which I have actually been working in professionally for 10 years, but before that was volunteering. And before that, I was an aerospace engineer, so completely different world. So I'm currently the chair of the Pompe Support Network. I've recently resigned from the board of the International Pompe Association, which is a great international network for patient groups. I just feel it's time for younger people to start taking those roles. I am a current trustee of the UK LSD Patient Collaborative, as I was a founder member of that many years ago, and also a member of the UK Newborn Screening Collaborative. So you can see that once you start working in this field, you take on many roles, wear many hats, and it's a fascinating thing to be involved with. Sorry, I can't find the control. Just to try and be quick to give you my personal experience with Pompe. My son was born back in '89, diagnosed 2 years later. He had been floppy. My wife had been shouting at doctors for 2 years. And it was only when he had a respiratory and cardiac arrest at the age of 2, my wife being a midwife did revive him, but it finally led to a diagnosis at Great Ormond Street Hospital. It was an interesting time because we live near Portsmouth in England, which is colloquially known as Pompe. They had no idea of Pompe disease. But once we got to Great Ormond Street, at least somebody knew a little about it. There was no internet, no, not the internet we know today, no Google. And my little book of neurology that I bought said that we should expect a life expectancy of no longer than 2 years. However, the advice we did get over those years meant that we kept him fit and healthy, good diet, lots of exercise with his mates, running about. His body did deteriorate a little. He had to have some serious surgery on his spine to straighten his back at the age of 14. And at the age of 15, we got a call about this time of year. It was the best Christmas present. Sorry, I always choke at this one. Best Christmas present we ever had was to be asked if we would like him to be enrolled on a clinical trial. We'd been following the drug development for many years, since the mid-90s, and that was the turning point for us. He started treatment and he's still on the same, well, no, he's just changed actually, but he's been on that treatment since, so he's been on it goodness knows how long, 15 years I guess, and he's still doing very well. He's very stable with the condition. He's a successful short film director. In fact, if you do have a look at our website, there are 5 short films of various people in various stages of Pompe disease, trying to show that there is a good life to be had after a diagnosis. And the best thing is, of course, he's just had, well, he has a son of his own now, a very healthy 20-month-old son called Moby. So for them, life is good. And for us too, as grandparents, it's wonderful. So just to briefly go over, that wasn't very brief, was it? Try and be briefer. Pompe disease is a neuromuscular condition. It's far more severe in infants who have enlarged hearts, but all people with Pompe have generalized muscle weakness. Some have respiratory weakness, some more limb girdle weakness. A few have problems with speaking and swallowing, and others will have smooth muscle involvement, which is like your gut, and they'll have gastrointestinal issues, and a few incontinence issues. Oh, I can't control. It's a, oh, no, it's a license, stop it. I'm having trouble, sorry. Come on. It's a lysosomal storage disorder, as or Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff. And newborn screening, recent screening through in the US states, suggests that it could have an incidence of 1 in 20,000, which would imply that we should have about 3,000 patients in the UK, but we have less than 10%. Sorry, phone's ringing. Implies 3,000 patients, but we only know the NHS is only aware of 275. So where are those people? We don't know. There may be a few misdiagnosed years ago, and I'm happy with that diagnosis. Then there will be many, I suspect, who are asymptomatic. It's a broad spectrum disease, from very serious in infants to adults who perhaps don't look for diagnosis until their retirement. And some people will just think this is me. No good at sports, and I'm getting old. That's a bit busy, but in brief, what I'm trying to say here is that when our son Jamie was diagnosed, there were 3 categories for Pompe. There was the severe infantile form. There were the juveniles. These were children that were perhaps running about as kids, but struggling as they grew older, and many would be wheelchair bound by the late 20s. When I say many, when Jamie was diagnosed, or during his life, we only really knew 5 or 6 other children of the same age in the UK, so it's not common. And adults, there was the adult category where they'd have a history of being rubbish at sport. They may have a bit of trouble walking, but they wouldn't seek help until many years later, late 20s, 30s, 40s, and some, as I said, in retirement. Now, the big thing that did change during clinical trials were done first in infants, which was strange, but very welcome. They were the most needy, and it meant that the drug company didn't have to produce an awful lot of drug. So the first trials were infants, later on in adults. And the classifications became known as infantile onset Pompe disease and late onset Pompe disease, mainly because of the trials. And sadly, we're stuck with that. Sadly, because I think the juvenile is a special case, although many of the infants now on treatment are developing as the juveniles did in those days. Remember, the infants didn't survive beyond their 2nd year. Now they are doing, but having some of those problems that the juveniles would have had. So none of these really represent the full spectrum, as I've said. That there are 400 mutations of the gene, and everybody's a little bit different. But we're stuck with those. So as I mentioned, I'm an aerospace engineer. So when we had our diagnosis, we had great support from the AGSD, the Association for Glycogen Storage Disease. At our first meeting in a little scout hut, we met a US doctor, Dr. Slonim, and he was the first person who really seemed to understand the condition. He had several children in his care, and he was reporting great success through diet and exercise, but only if they were compliant with that, and we all know children are not compliant. And he had success with 1 or 2, but didn't really publish his data, and there was clearly a need for a therapy. So I was volunteering for the charity in the mid-90s. Much at the same time, an enzyme replacement therapy had been proved that it worked in mice, at least, by Dutch researchers. So I was beginning to get quite active and realized that networking was key. You know, we worked with international charities and other similar charities, other LSD charities in the UK. And the drug was actually launched in 2006, and it was some years later that we decided that the charity needed a professional in charge, and for some reason that became me. And so 2006 was the year to celebrate. The drug was approved by the European Medicines Agency and the FDA. Our reimbursement decision in the UK was made by NSCAG, who advised the Department of Health. Now, that meant that we didn't go through NICE at the time. We'd had meetings, and you'll know Tim Cox, he was a fantastic advocate for getting these drugs to people. And health economists were the people who were really against us. So thankfully, we didn't go through NICE. The drug was approved and funded, and specialist centres were set up in the UK to treat all these children because they were already treating Gaucher, and there were new drugs coming along for Fabry, MPS, and Pompe, and so it made sense to put all these high-cost drugs into one treatment centre, or one group of treatment centres. There were 7 at the time, 8 later on, and that was a fantastic change. I mean, that was. I'll go into the clinical support changes as well as the way we interacted with patients and those centres. I mean, patients have been following this treatment for 10 years, so they're really excited and anxious to get access to it. Rollout did take a bit of time, and there were problems along the way, but eventually I think they all accessed ERT in England. Our devolved nations were a little slower. Wales wouldn't treat adults unless they could prove that they'd been symptomatic in childhood, and that wasn't always the case. It wasn't the case that they could prove it, they were, but it wasn't documented. In Scotland, they thought it was all too expensive. Things have changed now, and I think all countries and Ireland are now following much the same course. And nobody should be denied treatment in the UK. But at that time, we did have a Scottish family with 2 boys who had to move to England to access therapy. And I was getting calls from, not a huge number, but a few people in Wales who needed the therapy. And we had to support them by writing to and getting engaged with the hospital trusts in Wales. So it's quite a bit of work seemed to be loaded on us, and we were all very inexperienced at that sort of thing. But of course, working with the LSD Collaborative helped enormously with that, and taking advice from the MPS Society and Gaucher associations. So it was a difficult time for some. I mean, infants, we'd been through it in the trials, so we knew what to expect, but infants required immune suppression, which was quite severe. Otherwise, they would react against the new enzyme. They also had to have surgery to implant a port for regular infusions, and so that had to be done under local anaesthetic because general anaesthetic was too dangerous for them. And some of this, of course, there weren't many infants surviving, but there were a few, and they were already quite severely disabled. So the enzyme meant that they would survive, but they still needed a lot of care, and thinking to the future was quite difficult. We did have one family who objected to the fact that enzyme had been started. They would rather have not. But of course, with infants, we need diagnosis immediately, within weeks of birth, not months. And it can still happen that a GP or, the primary care doesn't pick up infants soon enough. And so, and ERT doesn't repair damaged muscle. So what you've lost is irrecoverable. So it was quite difficult for our charity to support these families. But children did respond quite quickly. The future did look bright for them if they were diagnosed early. It was an exciting time. I'm not sure where I said the first year was challenging. Well, yes, it was. Often the families would be so intensely looking after their children and working with the hospitals, they didn't call on the charities so much. We would love to have been involved more, but we often didn't know everything about them. So they did well in the first year. In later years, the dose was found not to be enough. So, I have a case where I would meet a young 2 or 3 year old at the conference running across the floor so I couldn't catch her to say hi. And she's now in a wheelchair, 12 years later. So, it was great. There were great times early on, but we soon found that we needed something better, particularly for the children. Adults responded, slowly, but they felt the improvements after a few months. Those improvements did plateau after about 6 months. It wasn't repairing muscle, but it was holding them stable. The disease had stopped progressing. After a few years, they did start to notice a slight declines, and that was worrying. But I think many are still doing really well, and there are new drugs that we hope will stop those declines, but time will tell. There were a few people who had reactions to the enzyme. Various methods to slow the infusion rates to try and help that, and many were able to carry on. 1 or 2 have stopped completely though, and so they couldn't accept the treatment. So there were lots of changes in the clinical support. The designated centres were set up. Most of our Pompe adults had been seen under neurologists, and am I well over time? And many neurologists actually opposed the therapy. They thought it was too expensive and not very effective. But so 1 or 2 patients weren't immediately referred. But multidisciplinary teams were set up over time, and patients had good access to physios, dietitians, psychologists, and others. Many metabolic physicians were not Pompe experts, so they had to become experts very quickly. But soon they were presenting at European conferences. They're forming their own networks, European and international. And we enjoyed access to all those experts around the world. In fact, I could refer, if I had a problem for a patient, I could refer to somebody in America or the Netherlands or anywhere in the world to try and find answers to their questions. The other thing that happened was home care services were set up for our patients. The VAT on drugs is high on hospital drugs, and the savings made by delivering those to the home more than covered the cost of home care. There have been issues with that, but essentially people are very happy with it, given the alternative. Charity support, we received a lot more funding as a result of the approval of the drug, which allowed us to employ a member of staff to go out and make home visits, and it really did transform what we could do. I think, we'd been volunteer-run organisation for much of the time, and we were not exactly helpless, but there wasn't always a lot we could do. But the other thing, of course, we were supporting families. Children were having infusions at home, at school, and we were producing lots of booklets to help those and others. A blood spot test was developed, similar to the Guthrie card for newborn screening. And there was hope that that would speed up the diagnosis. It was available for all ages, so GPs could request one. Not sure it made a huge difference at the time, but the diagnosis is slowly getting better, but not as quick as we would like it to be. There were problems along the way with delays due to manufacturing, contaminations and things, but nothing like the lockdown we experienced more recently, where patients missed up to 3 months of treatment with catastrophic results in some cases. So we have next generation drugs being developed. That did change our relationship with the original company, who became less open about the development progress, inventories, drugs and things. But we did work more and more with them on patient materials and awareness campaigns and all sorts of things. The support is often about just having a conversation with a patient, and that's why we're here. People do love to talk, especially when any rare condition is isolating. We can signpost to professional services, and there are many of those now, more than there used to be. Like I said, we can make inquiries internationally if necessary, and many more peer support networks have grown up. Originally, it was just a single email system, which people still yearn for. It's got long gone now, but the whole world of Pompe was communicating through email. Now we're all split up into lots of different platforms, Facebook, Instagram and others, and many groups on Facebook. So there's now an information overload. The science is progressing. It's never been fully understood, and it still isn't, but the understanding is improving. And our ability to understand it is not improving, I must say, not for me. All sorts of changes with symptoms and management of Pompe. It's always, changing and improving, or rather should improve if we had the funding to improve it. There are changes within the NHS to keep up with, and all social services and those things. And the drug development, we now have at least 12 companies developing new therapies, all sorts of things, substrate reduction therapies, gene therapies. And those companies want to have patient advisory boards. Our International Pompe Association has created a community advisory board to try and limit some of the number of patient advisory boards that we need. Okay, I'll stop there. Oh, that didn't work, did it? What happened to that slide? But that was supposed to be a list of how we might be contacted. Looked okay on PowerPoint. Sorry about that.
No, thanks, Alan. That was really interesting as well for everyone to see the journey that your community actually has been on. And it's something that obviously we're not there yet, but we want to be in the position where we then have the challenges post-treatment. How does that impact the community then when there's options available, how we manage that process? And I know that we look at the other organisations in advocacy have had to overcome those challenges. And, part of being part of the UK LSD collaborative is that we all share and learn from each other's experiences and what works, what doesn't work, what you would have done differently. And I know that when the time comes, you guys will be able to really support us on that journey ourselves.
Absolutely, it has been invaluable, but it also takes up an awful lot of time. We probably have more meetings with the LSD collaborative than I do with my own trustees. So, but that's the way it goes.
That is true. But I think that the work collaboratively is the way forward. And it's the only way we can learn. I think as small rare disease organisations, we need to fast track things. I think we fast track things by actually working really effectively together. So thank you very much for joining us. We've actually overrun slightly, so we won't have time for the last panel. So unless Maria and Daisy are there to join us very briefly, I'm not sure if they are. Oh, they are here. You can join us. Sorry, Daisy, Maria, ever so slightly overrun. Oh, and Emma is there as well. Add in. The idea of the last panel, we've got 5 minutes if everyone has an extra 5 minutes, was to really look at kind of a gap analysis, to be honest, what we're doing well and what we could be doing better. And I look at that in terms of support for families, post treatment, what we could be looking at doing to really make sure the families get the right support that they need and they deserve. So obviously, Daisy, you did an amazing, that study is absolutely fantastic. And the insights that you've got, how do you think we can translate those insights back into the community going forward?
I think I echo what you mentioned earlier, is that we have done the research, provide an overview about the caregiver's burden, the impact, and the needs that they told us about. So give the caregivers a preview, an overview of what will it look like down the road. So now you can prepare yourself to ask about the support. Don't be afraid, ask. Don't be afraid to go out to request more support. So this is very important. I think it's empowerment of our patients, the caregivers, and the community, the advocacy group. We need to ask for support. If you don't ask, there will be no support, right? It will take time to get those support for the community. And the collaboration Allan mentioned about, I think that's key. Key is collaboration across all industry, across all domains, the groups.
That's super interesting, because I see, Maria, you guys as really a facilitator on that collaboration, bringing together not just the patients, but then the patient groups in the different countries and putting us all on the same level, and then how we can work together. So how do you think we could improve what we're doing collectively with the other patient groups out there, with the patients?
Well, I think between Allan and Daisy, they got all the main ones. So but I think besides the support of the families, that it's not only economic support, which is for sure very important, but also other type of support, like more into social and care. And then from more in a drug development perspective, and what I see that it is still lacking is support for families to get into clinical trials, and because some of the families, they don't even know that there is maybe a clinical trial for their disease. So I think we need to work all together to have this flow of information, so everyone is on the same page and they don't miss these opportunities. And also from more in a patient organization perspective, I think that it's very important for families and patient organizations to collect data on their diseases, because this, for drug development, regulatory approval, and further on market and reimbursement, so pricing and reimbursement, is very important. Sometimes, as you know, in the regulatory system, some products fail because there's lack of data. But we need to keep collecting data in different manners, registries, natural histories, and other patient-reported outcomes. Because when something fails, if we keep collecting data, at some point we will not fail anymore. And of course, learning from failing is very important. So thank you.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Maria. And Emma, from your perspective, obviously you're speaking to families all the time. With the talks that were given earlier today, especially on the caregiver side, and then reflecting on what Allan has said, do you see that there's elements of work we should be focusing on with our Tay-Sachs community that are kind of expanding how we support people? It'd be interesting to get your views on what you think our families are looking for in terms of support.
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of support, when it comes to the bigger picture as well, it's just informing families, taking on board the huge overwhelm, especially initially within this first 12 months of diagnosis. Taking on the fact that these families are overwhelmed and giving them the right information in a timely way. Each family is so unique, and to introduce them into this whole world of different things they can possibly be part of and help to influence. And yeah, I think it's really important. But yeah, it's just making sure the families are yeah, it's just managing that overwhelm, I think, initially, and just keeping them, yeah, say each family is individual. Some families are very, very, very keen. They want to know all the questions. They want to help influence other things, but that's not always the case. Some families take a bit longer, and you can judge that for yourself as you get to know them.
Fantastic. So we've just 3 minutes over. I'll do a respective one. Probably has other meetings or other things I need to get on with the rest of the day. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of our speakers today. The topics that were discussed, I found personally very interesting, very close to my heart, and I hope everyone else were able to really reflect on what was discussed. If you have any questions, please reach out to myself or any of the other patient groups. We're more than happy to share any information or answer questions in the future. And tomorrow we're back online, 1 p.m. UK time, which is 8 o'clock Eastern, 2 p.m. Central European time. We'll be having updates on the science and research to hear about the really interesting work that's being done there, and actually looking at some of the new projects that are being launched as well. So to close, thank you very much everyone for today, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow as we continue the event. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
It takes a spark to start a fire. It takes a heart